Bobby Fazio.
All right, hello and welcome. Driver interviews with Bobby Fazio. Today is Tuesday, October 18th, 2022. We have we're leading off our tech segments today. You know, I've been getting back to going live. The Tuesday tell-all segment I just started 3 weeks ago, so this is my fourth week in a row. Pretty consistent here. Tuesdays at noon Eastern time, and we have Robin Lawrence from Holley. Holley.com, Holley EFI, Robin Lawrence, the Director of Motorsports, joining us today to educate us a little bit on our, fuel injection systems and other products from Holley. Driverinterviews.com is my website. Go there. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. That big red subscribe button is going to hit you in the face. Hit like, hit subscribe, do all those things. That helps out my little show here. And I have shirts and stickers on the website, as well as the ability to sponsor and or donate to the show. So sponsorship packages coming soon, and they are going to be very cost effective. I mean, I'm talking, maybe $100 a month or less for potential sponsors. So make sure to hit me up there, info@driverinterviews.com. Also follow me on Facebook and Instagram @driverinterviews. Hit the follow button. I do a lot of things on Instagram. I do things on Facebook. I do things on YouTube. Sometimes all three of those things are different. So I'd love for you guys to all be involved in all three of those social media platforms. Episodes, as usual, brought to you by draginsights.com, my other side project. Check out your stats. Check out your opponent's stats. Look at their average reaction time. Look at their lane preference. I use this app all the time. Not only am I, one of the creators, but I've had to race some pretty stiff competition lately, and it's nice to know which lane they prefer, what their winning percentage is in each lane, what their average reaction time is in each lane, how much stripe they tend to take, how much faster or slower than their dial they average. It's just a wealth of knowledge and information, so check it out. Not to mention a nice calendar on the homepage where you can see all the races that are coming up. So helps you plan. So draginsights.com, $50 per year for premium membership. And that gets you eligibility for the contingency program, which is an extra year of premium or an extra 6 months of premium based on a win or runner-up. So check that out, draginsights.com. All right, Robin Lawrence. How you doing, sir?
Not bad. A little chilly here, 26 degrees this morning. So.
Oof. Now, Robin, where are you located?
I live in Galesburg, Illinois. So in west central Illinois.
All right, so cold there. It's sunny and about 50, 60 here in Jersey, so not too bad. But glad to have you on the show. Thanks for leading off the tech segments here. Fuel injection, we're going to focus on your fuel injection systems today. And you guys have, quite a few of them. Maybe you can discern the differences for us between, your Dominator and your HP and your, Sniper and your what else do you have there?
Terminator X.
Terminator, yeah. So
So
we'll get into that. We want to get into certain, tuning aspects, maybe tuning for consistency versus tuning for power, speed density, alpha N, all kinds of things. So hopefully everybody's got their questions ready for Robin, and because I know I have quite a few ready for him also, and I'll probably scold me or yell at me today after I tell him what I've done with my fuel injection for this weekend.
If it works, it works.
So Walt Walker, good morning, Walt. Glad to see you out there. Chris Ashley, hi, Robin. Going to be a good listen. Absolutely.
Yeah, Chris is awesome. So
Doug Deck. Doug's looking forward to the discussion. He is. And Doug sent us some video of you launching today, Robin.
Yeah,
so
very valuable. Once he emailed me that, it was amazing what I saw on my tire. how my tire was getting crushed. I changed the rim size. It was interesting. So I appreciate Doug sending me that video as well.
Oh, yeah. Well, we'll take a look. Denny Patterson got to bounce. Oh, come on, Denny. Quit that job. Watch a podcast instead. Let's check out that video. Let's see if I have it here again. There it is. All right, so here's Robin Lawrence. He runs a 2012 Cobra Jet Mustang, factory stock H. So that's a naturally aspirated car, correct, Robin?
Yes, sir. Mm-hmm.
Is that the 30? Is that a Coyote, a 302 motor?
Coyote with a stock intake and stock throttle body.
All right.
Current.
So here's video compliments of Doug Deck of Robin Lawrence racing at St. Louis. He got a couple launches for us. Let's check it out. All right, Robin, I think I like the second launch better. It went a little higher, but it definitely seems like it was smashing the tire a little bit. So did you make some adjustments after that?
Yeah, I previously run an 11-inch wide rim with those tires, those Mickey Thompson bias tires. And I ordered a set of 9-inch rims, but that tires were hard to get for a while. So it was St. Louis is the first time I tried them. And my tire pressure, at a weight of about 33, 40, was 13 pounds on the 11-inch rims. And it did not like 13 pounds. It wanted more pressure. So, I was, thinking there would be a difference in rollout and some other factors, but really the way the sidewalls, are indexed to the wheel and is much different. And I found that I had to increase the tire pressure, and it responded very well. So, but yeah, if I hadn't have seen that, and it wasn't seeing that in the data log on the race pack, but that video was key. And once I saw that, I went up on tire pressure and worked away from that.
There you go. Video is so important. And if you can have a crew member help you out with that, highly, highly suggest it.
Yep.
So, Robin, let's get into some fuel injection discussion here. Okay. So you're at Holley. How long have you been at Holley?
In let's see, in about a week, it'll be 12 years.
12 years. Wow. All right. So good for you. Director of motorsports there.
Sure.
That's great. Now, fuel injection, EFI. I'm sure one of the most common questions people probably present to you is, should I run the fuel injection computer in speed density or alpha N? Can you speak to both of those settings and kind of educate everybody what some of their major differences might be, and what might be better for some and maybe not better for others? What do you think of those?
There's several different strategies, and one would be VE based, as well as speed density, as well as alpha N. VE based is a theoretical number based on the volumetric efficiency of the combination, and it's rather simple for VE, and we won't really talk about that a whole lot. I don't. A lot of tuners love VE. Speed density uses a map sensor to sense the load, and so that is your left side axis, whereas RPM would be at the bottom of your screen. So, whereas alpha N uses throttle position, so 0 to 100%, and it's instead of speed density as its load sensing or access point. And most cars work very, very well with speed density. The more radical the combination, the more radical the cam. What'll happen is you'll have very little resolution if it's idling and has almost no vacuum. And so they've got to have a little bit of vacuum, to run, but they can, be pretty close to atmosphere. I've seen combinations 85 kPa where the atmosphere is 95 kPa. So there's really not a lot of resolution there, and it's very tricky to get the transition from that idle to part throttle to wide open throttle. So a lot of people, because of the resolution, will use alpha N, where your your cursor or your dot pickup point is down in the lower left-hand corner, and you have lots of resolution transitioning into wide open throttle. So again, speed density uses a map sensor to sense load. Some people, one of the benefits of the map sensor is it can also equalize for atmosphere. So if you're going from high elevation to low, to sea level, you will not need to worry about a correction factor because the map sensor is doing that for you. Other people with alpha N will generally use a map correction, and they'll have the internal barrel they can make a table to use the internal barrel sensor that's inside the Holley, or a separate map sensor to have a correction factor, so to speak.
Right, and I wonder how many people are actually doing that in alpha N. Alpha N seems to be more like a carburetor. It's a fixed constant. It's going to deliver this much fuel at wide open throttle, which can be appealing to some. Okay, I mean, the majority of what we're doing in stock and super stock is bracket racing,
yes.
Right? So some people like, okay, that's constant. The weather can be my variable. With speed density, now you're introducing more variables. You have map sensor, you have air temperature sensor, and that is an input into the computer where it's saying, okay, this is the amount of load, this is the air temperature. Let's come up with this amount of fuel to try and meet the user's air fuel ratio. So it's a little bit of correction on the front end, and then if you want, optionally, more correction on the back end in the form of closed loop fueling, which we'll get to also, open loop and closed loop.
I mean, and you're right. If you're going to race the same elevation, the same racetrack, and run a bracket series every single weekend, and you have a weather spread of, let's say, 25 to 30 degrees, then, really alpha N would work just fine. The pro stock guys, because they tickle and they look at the air density, they look at the weather, they know, and they run alpha N in the pro stock cars, so they know, what they need to do for their fueling, to make a slight adjustment. And of course, they, make qualifying runs and they're always tweaking those numbers. So, but, for the average combination, the speed density is going to be, I don't want to say simple, but it's going to be pretty reliable and pretty repetitive. So
right, and it seems like you can go from track to track. If you want to race Gainesville in March and then go to Bristol, Tennessee in June, speed density should have you covered, or should get you in the ballpark, because your VE table, your volumetric efficiency table, should, I guess, have different cells for those tracks. Is that the way that would work?
Pretty much. So what'll happen is let's say I go to Bradenton in the wintertime, and we're at sea level, so it's going to be close to 104 kPa, which is very, very good air, dense air. Whereas normally up here I'm running 94 to 95 kPa. I'm slightly different elevation, so it's going to adjust a different spot on your map. If you have your map done well and it tapers, in those areas, then it can make that adjustment. Now, if you've used Jeff, if you've used the closed loop, and you've gathered data, or if you've used the learn and you've let the learn table populate, then you can, over time, you can transfer that to the base map, and then adjust, those lines, those individual lines, whether it's, 104 or 105 kPa or 80 kPa. And so then you can build a nice slope or a smooth transition, as you run the car more and more. It's like a who's who. My phone is like, it's ridiculous. I mean, it is like 5 calls in the last 10 minutes. But
it's all your fans. They're all watching the show. They all want to call you while you're on.
It's one of those days. But no, so my car typically corrects less than 1%. So it's usually, only a few tenths of a percent it corrects. So, but I've got so many runs on that combination that, and at some of these different tracks. Now, St. Louis was a little cooler, so we had some more movement and more adjustment that was done closed loop. So the base map gets you, that's base, and if you want to run open loop, then you're going to be dependent on those numbers. If you run the closed loop, you can pretty much, be in the ballpark, and it'll get you where you want to go with the closed loop as far as your commanded airfield ratio.
Right, and those learn options. Do you find success with those? Do they work well? The adaptive learn parameters?
And I can speak for Holley and my experience with Holley. And one of the reasons I came to work for Holley 12 years ago is because, I had been part of a group of people that were shown the system early and were given demonstration units to test and to give feedback. And I was so impressed with how quickly that it would adjust, the air fuel, based on the input from the ECU. And that's one of the reasons I knew that Holley would be very successful and want to be part of that success. So, but yes, you have a base map and that'll have a number in it. And I prefer pounds per hour because I understand brake specific. And so if I'm on a dyno and I see fuel flow numbers, those fuel flow numbers can transfer right over to the Holley software. So if somebody tells me they've got a 350 cubic inch engine and they got fuel flow about 200 pounds per hour, I can literally say, okay, and make a map with 200 pounds per hour at peak horsepower, peak torque area, taper it down from there, throw a number in like 8 pounds per hour at idle, and then start transitioning. And I can make a map very, very quickly because I go by pounds per hour of fuel. So, but anyway, back to your learn table. So your base map is, the solid map, and here's the numbers. Your learn table exists over the top of the base map. So the learn table will look at the numbers that it took to get to your commanded air fuel ratio. So if I'm at 200 pounds per hour of fuel and it's cold and it's dense air and we got good baro, and it puts another 3% of fuel into the tune as I'm going down the track, it will save that 3% in the cell that it corrected. So I have the option of going back and saying, oh, wow, it corrected 3% in the learn, it saved it, and I can transfer that with a push of a button to the base fuel map. So you want to be careful about that because you want to resist, because sometimes you'll have areas that will have highs and lows, and so you want to make sure the transitions are smooth. But the learn will literally, it's an ever-changing, ever-moving number based on the climate and the characteristics of the weather that day. The base map doesn't change unless you transfer your learn to that.
Okay, so it's not an automatic change. It's not changing it as you're driving the car then.
Well, it changes it as you're driving, but if it's in closed loop, and it saves it in the learn table.
Right.
So okay. You can transfer that learn table, and then so you basically just chip away at getting your base fuel map closer to what it really wants.
All right, cool.
Or you can.
Is there a calculator for that? Like, let's say right now I have 24-pound injectors in my car. I think they're somewhat tapped out. I want to switch to 30s, but I know that all these pounds per hour. Now mine's in pulse width. It's not in pounds per hour in my table.
Right.
I'm gonna have to shorten all those up, and I just would like to know if there was like a calculator or a starter table for that, because I don't really know how much. I do know one's 24 pounds per hour and one's 30 pounds per hour, but I guess I have to come up with a new table here.
Well, not with the Holley. With the Holley, because it's in pounds per hour, once you change the injector size and the setup, it just pulses that injector as much as it needs to attain your pounds per hour.
All right, so the table will then adjust itself because I've inputted the size of the injector.
No, the table doesn't change. The math is done in the background. So if I've got a 24 and I go to a 30, it says, wow, I need, 20% less pulse to attain the same amount of fuel. So the Holley does that math. You don't need to worry about pulse width or duty cycle, or you don't worry about, because that was the problem in some of the systems I've used in the past, is you had to change the whole map based on, the injector size. So you don't do that with the Holley. So like your deal, if you had a Holley on there running 24 pounders, you would just change the setting in the Holley for the 30s and move on. That's it.
All right.
Not the base map.
Well, and that would be an alpha N, and that will, or just speed density in that situation.
No, either one. As long as as long as you're not using VE, alpha N and speed density are both in pounds per hour of fuel.
Okay. Cool.
Yes,
all right. Now the $1 million question that everybody also asks, and I'm sure you probably know it, is how should I run the car? Does closed loop work? Does closed loop make the car less consistent? I don't want it correcting when it's going down the track. Of course, if it's not correcting, the motor could experience a dangerous lean condition. So it's like, it's a slippery slope here. So what are your experiences with this?
A couple things. And we talked about Pro Stock. I mentioned Pro Stock a little earlier. And on the engine dynos, most engine dyno poles are 300 to 400 RPM per second is typical of like a superflow dyno. A lot of engines accelerate much faster, anywhere from 1100 to 2000 RPM per second. Yeah, Darren. A lot of those. So, an O2 sensor, is in the tailpipe, is in the collector or the primary tube, whichever you decide. And so there is some latency, obviously, from the time the engine fires to the time that it gets the information to the ECU. At 300 to 400 RPM a second, even upwards of 500-600 RPM per second acceleration rate, closed loop is very, very effective, very, very good. It's also very consistent. Now I've talked to a lot of different racers who have tried closed loop and it's not worked. I mean, we're talking maybe 1 in 20 people that say, I tried it. There's so many things that can affect how closed loop works. Again, we talked location, whether what type of collector you have, what the position of the O2 sensor is in that collector. Maybe you put it in a primary tube and just assuming the rest of the engine is going to be globally similar. I talked to you earlier. I said there are no definites. There are some guidelines and let's go this direction, but test is going to be the best thing. I like closed loop, and probably 95% of the people I deal with run closed loop. And I run it in my car. I don't pull data logs out of the Holley, at all. I mean, literally, I look at some of the data that's in the race pack that transfers over, and if it looks okay, then I'm good with it. I'm done. I don't need to move on. And because open loop. I mean, you Pro Stock guys are going to use open loop all the time because of the acceleration rates. When we first started the program, there were several people that were using, closed loop in the first 3 gears. The last 3 gears, because the acceleration rates were much slower, and they were able to get some hard data. And some of them used that data. Some of them, it was very mixed. But open loop, you better have it dialed very. You have a pretty good program. With all the time I have in my car, I could run that thing open loop and it would be fine. It's because it's correcting so little. But we've had some that collector design, we couldn't run them. We had such bad information from the O2 sensor that, we asked them to move it, in the collector or move it to a primary. But, the Holley works very, very well in closed loop. That's one of its main attributes. So
what do you think is better than in the collector or in the header primary for the closed loop?
Well, with a race car, because you have, the open air behind that open header, that collector, and then you have a cam with a lot of overlap, the O2 really is ineffective below a certain RPM. It gives a very bogus readings, so I don't turn closed loop on in my car until 5,000 RPM. So launching, and then part of first gear and driving through the pits, whatever, is all open loop. So I just look for closed loop above 5,000. The benefit of putting it in the primary is that you can lower that RPM down because it still is getting decent pulses, and it's not pulling air in from the collector. So, when we did some testing with Copo, when we were working with that, they were using number 5 primary, and they lowered it. I think they were down around 2,500 RPM. So one of the biggest issues I see with guys putting Holley on their cars, racers, is that they've got closed loop turned on, at 500 RPM, so all the time. And had a gentleman from Texas, nice guy, came to me in St. Louis, and he's like, I can't drive the car. It idles at 2,200 RPM. It's a miserable. Da, da, da. Okay, fine. So, we were about ready to get called up for qualifying. I'm like, I got like this much time, which I'm like, no. I know how it is. I know what it's like. Zip over there. First thing I see is this thing's in closed loop. And so I said, dude, you cannot do this. And so the beauty of that, it had learned enough that it was okay in the lower RPM. So we turned closed loop off up until about 4,000 RPM, this automatic car, 4,000 RPM, cleaned up, leaned it out at idle because they had pounded so much fuel into the learn table because he had closed loop turned on with an open header. And so cleaned that up. And I won't tell you the number he qualified because you'll know who he is. But anyway, qualified very well, drives the car. I've got notes from the guys saying all I did was it's an elementary thing, that you cannot use closed loop on an open header, but you can get away with it in the primary tube, like you said, at a lower RPM. But then you're still, everybody says, oh, you don't get the other cylinders involved. Well, if you're in a collector, you can have one at 17 to 1 and one at 10 to 1. It's the same effect. So right. The biggest thing is look at your spark plugs. A lot of people think once they do this, they don't have to look at spark plugs. They'll tell you everything. And so if you look at your plugs and they all look the same, and you can pretty well trust that O2 sensor is a good shape. But if you've got one that's white and one that's black, then I need to work on that. So
right. And then as far as looking at those plugs and seeing those major differences, can you explain a little bit, like especially in fuel injection where you can tune individual cylinders, would you add fuel to the cylinder? Would you take timing away from the cylinder? Would you subtract fuel from a cylinder, or would you put more timing into a cylinder? Are there specific differences there?
Well, yes and no. First thing is you have to have a baseline cylinder. I see guys with 8 cylinders, and I look in the Holley, and they got correction on each one. And I'm like, which one is your baseline? Which one is your up and down percentage? And so you gotta find one cylinder that's happy, or make one happy, and never change that. Everything adjusts percentage wise up or down from that one cylinder. That's the first thing. But I would literally, I had individual O2s on the engine last year. This year, after tickling those things and working on them, I went to a smaller primary tube on my header this year, and then just didn't put the O2s in that one. So, I look at plugs and they're the same. So, what I would do is I would start tickling cylinders. If you have something that's dark, maybe take 1% out of that cylinder and just monitor it and watch it. And the same with if it's white, add maybe 1% or 2% to that cylinder and just monitor it and watch it. So just start tickling them until, and if it slows down, I went in the wrong direction. I mean, the time slip, the chest, the dyno, whatever, it tells all, but, mile per hour. But they'll also, what'll happen is sometimes literally you won't pick up a lot of power, but the engine gets happier and will accelerate quicker. So we've seen that where we trim all the cylinders and we don't pick up like a lot of power, but the engine is happier, so it will accelerate through the gears faster. So anyway, but baseline one cylinder, as far as timing is concerned, that's a little bit, you gotta look at the plugs again, maybe bore scope, look at the tops of the pistons if you can, the bore scope. I don't mess around a whole lot with timing as far as individual cylinder timing. If I have something that's continually hot, I put fuel to it, it doesn't respond, then out of caution, I'm taking a degree out of those cylinders. Just out of caution. And again, if it doesn't slow down, then, I'm okay. I have a chassis dyno of my, for, side gig, side personal deal. And I've actually, worked with several different racers, from Division 3 have been on the dyno. And like my car, I found out that I was running a certain timing, and I found out that, it didn't want that much timing. I was running 27 degrees, which was a standard kind of number. It didn't want 27. It made more horsepower, 26. And so now we're tweaking individual cylinders. When you talk about, the Holley will do a couple things. It'll do per cylinder fuel, per cylinder timing, but it'll also do it per gear. So if you have any changes going on, from the way your air intake is or the way your hood is or however, then, you can also, tweak it per gear if the dynamics change, dramatically from, the starting line to the top end.
All right. And then I wanted to just, because you made me think of something here now, at the top of gears. Now, you said that the Holley corrects, it's very, very quick on a correction assignment. Can it be too quick, though? I mean, let's say you're shifting a gear and you got a lean spike at the top of that gear. You may not want it to dump extra fuel in to try and correct that. That could just be that's just a natural occurrence, right? Or you're coming off a two-step on a launch. As soon as you let go of that two-step button and the car launches, it might still see the remnants. The O2 might see the remnants of of like a lean condition there, because the car, the air-fuel ratio is coming down to where the converter hits, and it might dump extra fuel in, which is a situation that I've had to deal with.
And that's, I mean, the engine, when it's loaded, it has different characteristics. So the engine, when it gets tugged down, whether it's from a converter or a clutch or a gear change, and there's no set standard. I mean, some go lean and some go rich. The nitrous guys, one of the famous pro nitrous racers years ago came to us and said he was knocking the tops of the pistons off on the gear changes on a 900 cubic inch engine with like stupid amounts of nitrous. And so, and what we did is we enabled so that you can basically, on the gear change, put more fuel into it to,
Darren.
Nice.
Darren, way to go. You made him lose his train of thought.
That guy's trouble. He's trouble, that guy right there. So, but there's, and I've seen him lean spice. I've seen him rich, because most of my stuff, when it tugs down, it goes rich. So I leave it alone, on those. Now, the guys with the lean deal, there's ways that you can manipulate the Holley and make, different modifiers and in the advanced tuning section to on the gear change, either add or take away fuel. And it's not perfect. I mean, if you look at some of the O2 graphs, even on some of the carbureted stuff, I mean, it's not perfect. But if you can attempt or aspire to try and trim it to to reduce the amount of how far it goes lean or how much it goes fat at those points, it can, many times, make it happier, make it safer. Sometimes it's such a small window or small occurrence, you don't worry about it. I mean, it happens so quickly. Sometimes we can overanalyze the data and say, I don't like that spike right there. Well, did it slow anything down? No. Did it hurt the engine? Yeah, it's hard to tell. So you try and mitigate some of those, but in a dynamic environment like launching the car, shifting the gears, a lot of times some of those things you can't control.
Right. Yeah, I'm one of those overanalyzers, and especially with these fuel injection software, the data logger can get very good resolution to the point where you see every little thing, and you're like, oh, I don't like that, or I don't want it correcting there on that little shift. That could be dumping fuel in there that's hurting the run, or making it inconsistent, or what have you.
Well, you can limit, and with the closed loop or the learn tables, you have a percentage that you allow it to plus, add fuel, or minus, take the fuel away. So there's a lot of people out there that will literally at certain RPMs or certain spots, they will say, I'm only going to let it, go plus, no more than 2% or no more than 5%. And then I'm only let it minus no more than, than 1%, something like that. That way, now there's not as much resolution in those areas to where you could, do a finite per 100 RPM, but you can certainly try to do it at the bottom of the gears, to limit how much it spikes or moves that number.
Now what's your good rule of thumb here? Do you think a plus or minus 5% to start, or a plus or minus 10%? What do you think? I'm more of like a 2%. I don't want it doing anything because
and see that's where your love for alpha N is coming around. So you can run a speed density program and you can literally limit it to 1%, and it's going to run what your base map says, and it might tickle at 1%, and that's all. So you're basically running alpha N at that point in time. But you're using your speed density map and your low RPM position. So my rule of thumb, and I deal with I'm involved at the start of a lot of situations. So I'm involved in situations where, we're not, finite tuning the thing after the gentleman's had it running, for 3 years. I'm with a guy who just put it on. So I open up the parameters pretty wide because I want to make sure that we're gathering the information correctly and it's correcting. I've had people put fuel injection systems on and they come back and say, oh my God, it's going lean right here. I look at the deal and, I think Mike Finnegan had a problem with his 55 Chevy, on drag week, and he didn't have enough pump. So the Holley was attempting to throw as much fuel to it as possible, within the limits of what he had set. And so, but I've seen off-road or different racers who have fuel pumps, their fuel filters starting to clog, where they had 50% set in their limits, and the fuel pressure was dropping, but the Holley was correcting up to the 50%. But then I've seen also on the other side with O2 sensors that went bad, and I got people calling me up from the track going, my car is slowing down, it's blubbering, it's black, and I'm like, turn it off, turn closed loop off, clear your learn table right off the bat. And they're like, what do I do? I've got to get through the weekend. Okay, clear your learn table and just turn closed loop off. Boom, they go out and run, and they put a new O2 sensor in it, and they're good to go. I recommend new O2 sensors once a year. Once you get done with the season, get another O2 sensor. I also recommend keeping one in the trailer. But the average call that I get from racers, either at tracks or starting to see inconsistency when they're running closed loop, is they've had these things in there for 2.5 years. Like leaded fuel, O2 sensor. If you just replace them every year, then I think you'll be solid. And I'm guilty too. I work for Holley, and I haven't changed mine in 2 years. So
no excuse for you. Come on.
I know it.
Yeah, I'm guilty of it too. And that's the thing with fuel injection in general. You're putting a lot of trust in sensors. And I
Yes.
mean, funny story. A buddy of mine, Steve Foley, who Darren knows very well, the coolant temperature sensor went bad round 3 at Gainesville, and it started reading 25 degrees going down track. So there you go. It goes into warm up enrichment there while he's going down track and starts dumping all kinds of fuel. And the poor guy lost a round, an easily winnable round. So
right.
that's that's scary.
Right
Now, word of the wise, and here you can put this in your Holley EFI tuning, is at wide open throttle, automatically turn off warm up enrichment. There you go. I just gave Holley another idea that they can make money off of.
I was saying that's the car owner's fault. He's the one that was supposed to change those sensors and have those sensors up to snuff. So
right.
So no, I'm kidding. Yeah, no, I've seen some fail, or I've seen the poor guy that I ran in class at U.S. Nationals. Jean-Claude, Tremblay, Jean Tremblay. Canadians, nice guys, and they were awesome. Same engine combination I have. Jimmy Runzello does their engine. Jimmy helps me with mine. Just really, really, nice guys. And they said, "Hey, can you come take a look at our data log from that run?" Okay, went and looked at it, and it was showing, as you said, the intake air temperature was like minus 40. And so I said, "Wow, something wrong. You're going to take air temperature." And me and Gene went over, looked at it, and we're looking and looking. I said, "Well, what's this wire for?" And his dad comes over and goes, "Oh, it plugs in right here," and plugs it in. And I'm like, so we've seen so many where they're unplugged and literally. It'll skew that correction number. It'll have an air temp correction table, which a lot of guys now will have that zeroed. So they'll hit 100%. That way there's no percent up or down, and they'll zero that. And that's okay. Now, if you're trying to start your car, it's 45 degrees in St. Louis, and you're trying to start your car and you don't have some sort of enrichment in the cold warm up or the air temp, then it's going to be trouble. So
yeah, right. No, I'm totally for the warm up enrichment on those cold days. I bet you there were a lot of hard starts at St. Louis that day for anybody that wasn't tuned properly. But at wide open throttle, we need certain things to just you're not needed. Yeah, you're not needed right now. Warm up enrichment. But the next question that I'm sure you get all the time is what air fuel ratio am I supposed to go for? And there's no right answer for that. I mean, that's
no. You got to remember, air fuel ratio is a factor of a number that's thrown out there by the equipment that you're using. So most everything is in lambda, and lambda is different for different fuels. And so they're making an assumption that on the fuel that you're running and the correct lambda of that fuel, then they're spitting that out on a screen telling you a number. So keep in mind that number is very relative. And so there's no magic air fuel ratio number. The magic number, in my opinion, is what makes the car go the fastest. And Holley has two different sensors that are available for the HEFI, for the Dominator, and the HP. And then one's a Bosch 4.2, and then the other one's an NTK. The NTK is very expensive. It also seems to be more robust in high horsepower, high heat applications, and it seems to hold up better to the leaded fuel longer. So now, saying that, I've seen as much of, I have on the test bench, I have test gas. So I can go ahead and, hook up a Holley system on my bench and then, put the test gas to an O2 sensor. And I've seen as much as between the two sensors, half a point of difference in air fuel ratio. So it's very relative. So I run NTKs in my car, and my car is targeted for about 13.4 to 13.5 air fuel ratio. Now, fuel can also affect that. So you've got fuel, you've got your air, your what, air fuel ratio sensor you're using. So, rule of thumb, I tell people on race cars, 13 to 1 is a good number for an NTK to start out with. The Bosches seem to like the 12.5 to 12.7, 12.8 range. I get a different number on my race packs, up in the primaries, which they tend to be show a little fatter. So, somewhere around 12 to 1 in the primaries of the race pack. So I'll have 13.5 in the collector, and it'll show 12 to 1 in the primary on the race pack. But I looked at it as all relative.
Right, yeah. And then all the plugs will look the same, because I have that also.
Yes.
I'm still running, the fast system in my stocker right now, and it's an NTK sensor. That one seems to read 12.5-ish, and then my Bosch sensors that I have in the other cylinders all seem to be 12.0 or 11.8, and then I get worried, and I've leaned some of those out, and the car will go slower. So I just put it back to where it is. All the plugs seem to look the same. I just have to go with that. So. Yes. I guess thank you for verifying that.
Well, it's just so I got so many people that want a definitive number, and I've heard of the tuners that basically they'll sit there and say, this is the number I got to use all the time, and it's like, everybody asks me what air fuel ratio do you like, and I like the one that makes the car go fastest. So that's it.
Right. How about EGTs? Do you mess with EGTs also?
I haven't messed with EGTs since a long time ago in my turbo car back in the mid '90s. And EGTs are just slow. I shouldn't say that. I had EGTs on my Nitrous Nova in 2006 to 2010 at EGTs. And about the only thing the EGTs told me was which cylinder was dead. So on my car, we know which one to go to right there. So, and with the nitrous deal, everybody's like, oh, here's the number to stay away from, and shoot it. We were at 1,1800, degrees on, in a nitrous deal. Yeah. It's like, okay. No wonder my valves are.
Well, EGT is good. It can alert you of a problem, but as far as tuning, it's not as useful a tool, as an air fuel ratio.
It's very late information. So a lot of the blower guys, it's very good for big blower guys, but the fuel guys, it's very important for them. I mean, let's face it, an O2 sensor would literally melt in what they're doing. So they just won't hold up to the heat. So, but I find on an NA deal, on these type of race cars that we're doing, that it's just late information that really is not very useful.
Okay. Yeah. Well, good to know. But let's talk about, because you mentioned fuel there and the differences in fuel.
Yes.
Injector sizing. Now, as I told you, I think, I'm tapping out my 24-pound injectors. I don't know for sure. When I did learn how duty cycle worked, and somebody said, you're hitting like 95% duty cycle, which means my injectors open 95% of the of the shot there. It has no time to close, basically.
Correct.
They said raise your fuel pressure. So I took my fuel pressure, which was at like 43, which is where I figured I had to put it because that's what the fuel injector was spec'd at. Raised it up. They said raise it up to like 50, which I did. That brought my duty cycle down. So more fuel pressure meant less spray, less pulse width, less duty cycle, and the car picked up a nice chunk, about a 1/10 of a second. So what size injectors should we be using? How high can we crank the fuel pressure? Should I go up to 55? Should I go up to 60? I mean, should I just keep going with fuel pressure, or should I buy new injectors? Like, what's the pros and cons of that?
Well, it depends on the situation you're in. And again, there's no definites, but the situation that you are in, where you are maxed out on your injector, crank some fuel pressure to it. Be very careful, because at some point in time, that injector might lock up or not respond correctly to the input from the ECU. And so, we've seen injectors that will lock up at 75 psi. And so, you got to be careful about, going too much. Most injectors run the best at their rate, their design pressure. So if it's designed at 43, it's going to be the most stability. It's going to have the most linearization across the range of pulse width at its design. Now, Fords were traditionally 43 and a half, and Mopars were for a long time. GM was typically 58 or 4-bar, where Mopar is now up there also, and I think Ford might be that way too now. But so find out what they're designed for, and I like bigger injectors. I like to have control of. When you talk about duty cycle and fuel pressure, as we talked earlier off, before the show, a lot of racers years ago, when they went to a track, oh, it's cold out, they'd bump up fuel pressure. Oh, it's hot out, they'd back it off. I mean, they were tuning their car, and it worked very well, especially if they were on the edge and running 100%, which is where kind of you're at. And you picked up, because you needed more fuel because you were out of fuel. So, I tend to like to not go over 80% duty cycle. So if I do a calculation, for, what kind of fuel flow the engine requires, which is, very easy. I mean, anybody can do simple math. And so basically, I don't know, how much horsepower does your car make?
To the rear wheels, about 300. So what's that, about 350 it would probably make on I never had it on an engine dyno, only on chassis dyno.
Let's just say 360. So take that times a brake specific of about 0.45, which is a typical brake specific. I mean, race stuff might be a little cleaner, so, times, 0.45. So now you have, your pounds per hour of fuel that it requires at its peak horsepower. Divide that by 8, and 20-pound injector, for 168 pounds per hour of fuel. Now, I don't know how much yours is actually taking, but so yeah, yours, and then you want to add 20% to add 20% to that because of the 80% rule, so yeah, 24.3. Right. So right there, if we take that horsepower level, we know that your injector is wide open. So that's how you would size an injector theoretically, and allow yourself 20% minimum over what your horsepower level dictates as far as fuel flow. That's kind of my opinion. Now, saying that, do we want to even delve into injector timing? So, that's going to get really crazy.
Well, that's more crucial now. If I go up to a bigger injector, it's going to be open less amount of time. Correct. So now to me, the timing of it is going to be very important. Whereas when the thing was open 85% of the time, the actual phasing of the injector, it was just spraying the whole time. Does it matter when it's spraying? Well, probably not as much.
And down to 80%, it's pretty much spraying all the time too. So it's really not going to affect a whole lot, as far as a real difference. Now, if you have an injector that's 3.5 times your requirement, now you can narrow the window of how, when it sprays per, the valve timing of the valve opening and closing events. So there's, and again, there's no definites. I mean, some are designed, some injectors and some manufacturers design them to spray off the cylinder wall. Some design them to try and spray on the top of the valve. And some have straight nozzle shots and some have cone mists. So it's very, very different, in different applications and different, possibilities.
Well, and that was another thing. See, I was told, reading all the forums, crank the fuel pressure up. It shoots a better mist. It atomizes better than the big injector shooting the short pulse. It's more like shooting stream as opposed to shooting a spray, and that's why I was told smaller injector, high fuel pressure, let it spray more.
And the answer to that is, and so it's there is no definitive on that. And trust me, we're playing with injectors on the engine dyno because we can see the nuances on an engine dyno. compared to a chassis dyno. So we're looking at different patterns, and we've tried the streaming type, the misting type, and I'm about ready to go back on the engine dyno here with my 13 engine combination, and we got to change the cams, and then we're going to put solid lifters in it, and then we're going to do injector testing. And so we've got some injectors, because it's a 4-cam, the stock injector spray in a fang type spray to put them down individual ports, and then we've got one that streams straight down, so it's going to hit that little V and split off, and see that. So we've got some stock injectors that I shouldn't say stock, they're Ford bigger injectors that will give us the volumes and amounts we need. But again, that's a real unknown area as far as what injector pattern, pressure, timing. We worked with some of the pro stocks on injector timing, phasing, and hell, we found 20 horsepower in the dyno. These guys are high-fiving each other, and but it doesn't equate to the racetrack. It doesn't show up in accelerating or moving the car down the track. And if they found the secret to that, they haven't told me at this point. So, but it's something that it still fascinates me that we find that horsepower on the engine dyno, and so it's one of those things that it's interesting enough that I want to figure out if there's something there at some point. But so a lot of people have played with oversizing. Like, my injectors are 100-pound-per-hour injectors, so they're literally 4 times as big as your injectors. And my engine, I think, is 550 horsepower roughly at the crankshaft. So really, I need about a 43, 42-pound injector to satisfy what I'm doing. So I'm a little bit about 2.5 times the injector size. And the only thing that I really gained from injector phasing or timing on the injector is I've been able to make it drive smoother coming back from the turn road. I move that around, and instead of bucking and kicking and things like that with the camshaft, I've able to smooth that out a little bit, And some people it's actually helped them staging and then off the converter also.
All right. Well, Darren seems to think there's a little more 60 foot to be had with the smaller injector. And I wonder, I tried the larger injectors once. I went from the 24s to the 30s one time, but I didn't really have the tune right, and I didn't have enough time to try and get it figured out. So I just put the 24s back in because I was, it was a divisional event, and I had no business probably trying that there anyway. But I wanted to win some rounds too. But it's something that I want to try again.
Are you running sequential?
Yes, I run sequential. With a dual sync distributor, and I just feel sequential. That's the only way you can really, I guess.
There's some guys still out there running bank to bank or batch fire with no cam sensor. They're just running crank signal only, and those could be interesting also because it's just putting the fuel in randomly every cycle, 4 injectors each rotation, and so that can also be. It can also be cleaner with sequential up on the 60 foot and on this.
I would think, yeah, and on the 2-step. I mean, have you heard some of these cars? A lot of these Copos and these maybe it's limited to the supercharged cars. Maybe there's no way around it, but they just sound like they're about to blow up on the 2-step. Pop, 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 bang, and then they launch and have like a 15, 60 foot time somehow, and it's pretty crazy. But
there's and there's some tuning that has to be done. On the 2-step. I mean, it's still knocking the cylinders out but the cylinders that are firing, you want to have those, having the optimal amount of fuel. And then when you let go of the foot or the button or whatever you're using, you want it to, be able to go into the right amount of fuel, that makes that thing happy. So
right now I'm thinking that's again another trial and error type of thing. But do you think coming off the 2-step, that air fuel ratio should just go right down to where, it usually goes for the rest of the run, or do you think it needs to be a little bit richer for the hit?
I have coached a lot of people about adding fuel on the launch in first gear, or as it traverses to the converter spike. Okay, so I've told them my theory is, extra fuel and pound a couple degrees of timing into it also at that moment, because that, in my opinion, helps helps move the car. When you have a 3,000 plus pound car you want to move, you need torque. And so I believe add the extra fuel and a couple degrees of timing, and the engine isn't so, the chambers, the piston isn't so hot that it can't take a couple extra degrees, especially to cover up the extra fuel.
Now, when you say add the extra fuel, are you saying in that two-step cell?
Nope.
Load that up a little bit, or?
I do it in first gear.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that is a Holley specific type of thing then.
Not really. In the transition, well, you can. I mean, there's many ways to do it, but one of them is to do it in the ramp on your base fuel map, from where let's say you're foot braking at 3,000 and your converter flashes at 6,000. So in that area, I would add fuel. I would add pounds per hour fuel, and test. Most everybody I have worked with on that has picked up with it. I had a gentleman at Bowling Green Divisional that didn't pick up with it at all. Didn't help his car at all. So he went right back to what he was using, picked right back up. So it doesn't work for everybody, but for most, the engine gets tugged down and loaded. It wants that fuel and that timing.
All right, so that's good to know. And smooth transitions. I mean, I'm no Robin Lawrence, but I've helped people. I've looked at their fuel tables. People come to me with questions once in a while, and you'll see, fuel map that it looks like you're in the Glacier Mountains. I mean, it's just crazy. So
yeah, that's very important. The fuel cell, it's almost like a two-step. When the ECU has to make a calculation on how much fuel to put at that point, it looks at 6 cells around that dot. So it kind of, and it uses a percentage of this other cells around the dot. Well, if you're trying to transition and you have a 50 pound per hour change in one cell, it really, really pisses it off. So it almost like I've had guys that hit that, it sounds like they're going through a two-step.
Right. So smooth transitions there, and then timing transitions. What do you think about cells? How much timing can you change comfortably between cells?
I'm a little bit, I'm not a good person for that, because, my timing is very steady, but I do, like I said, we take timing out in certain instances to help, get a car out of the hole. And so we'll try to be very smooth with that ramp and ramping the timing in on the hit, us taking the timing out in a slow manner, and then bring it back in a slow manner. In the past, we've had, guys where they have, 32 degrees, on the hit, they'll pull, 12 degrees out, 2/10 in, and it's literally up and then down again. And again, it doesn't like that either. So smooth is very, very good.
Yeah, I wouldn't think. Wow.
But some of the higher horsepower, A stock automatic cars like that on a track that might be going away, a lot of those guys will have to manage their timing in first gear to try and keep them happy.
Right now, and you said in the Holley, it can sense gear changes. You can do different tunes in different gears.
Yes, sir. There's a setup in advanced tuning, and there's several different ways. You can have a switched input that tells it's in a different gear. Then you have the typical RPM drop, that if it drops, I think it might set up at 800 RPM. If the engine is below 3,000 RPM for more than 3 seconds, it sets it back to first gear. It doesn't recognize any gear changes below 6,000 RPM. So you set those parameters in that way, and mine's been rock solid. Mine's been really, really good. So
interesting. And well, I guess this is a chance. Tell us about, you have what, 4 different systems: Sniper, Terminator, HP, Dominator. Do all 4 of those do those things? What is a stock eliminator racer? Which one probably would benefit me the best?
well, first of all, I started Holley. They had the HP and the Dominator, and those are referred as the HEFI platform, Holley EFI, HEFI. Those are kind of the go-to for most stock eliminator, super stock racers. That's used in pro stock also. The HP is used in pro stock. The HP is also used in ARCA, NASCAR ARCA series, and NASCAR Truck Series. Ilmore uses those. The guys over at the Monster Jam, they use the Dominator on the monster trucks. That was a mechanical system, straight methanol, and they wanted to reduce the amount of emissions in some closed buildings, and so they went to fuel injection. So those systems are the bedrock of Holley EFI. Later on, we developed what's called the Sniper, which Sniper was a very low cost muscle car type replacement. Take your carburetor off, put this on there, no rails, no injectors. It's a true TBI, throttle body injection, so the injectors are integral into the system, and the ECU is actually on the unit, so it's all self-contained. You got to put an O2 sensor in the collector, and then power it and rock and roll. It's a very simple, very low cost type system. Terminator X is a somewhat of a decontented HP. So it uses a very similar platform to the HP and a lot of different components and the board design. But the Terminator X is again a low cost. I proposed it as a decontented for crate engines and street rods and guys that weren't racing per se. So Terminator X is a separate than the ECU. We do have TBIs with Terminator X, but the ECU is mounted remotely or away from the engine and that sort of thing. Terminator X sells. Our volumes went through the roof because Terminator X is again so cost effective. Terminator X doesn't have as good of injector drivers as the Dominator and HP, and by that it just can't run low impedance injectors. And nowadays, most people, the availability of high impedance injectors, there's guys running 2,000 horsepower engines with Terminator X. Terminator X does not have internal data logging. It has to be done on the handheld or some other external device. The HP and Dominator both have 4 gig of internal data logging.
I like that, by the way, because
yes,
it has like 20 seconds of data logging, and that's it. Whereas I was running a Cobra Jet powered car recently that had the Holley on it, and it was like we had like 5 runs on there, and then you could just download them all at once. It stored them all. So
yes,
that
sir.
was cool. I like that.
Yep. No, it's so again the Terminator X was, I think the 5.3 junkyard turbo, crowd, sloppy mechanics crowd, they've embraced that, and they're on a lot of cars, work very well. I've got a couple of racers who have actually put them on stock eliminator cars, and I haven't done my job and gotten them in the approval list for NHRA yet. So I'm somewhat reluctant because, I just like the HP and Dominator so much. I tell people, you stay with, but they're using it. It works great. And I was going to do a little bit of testing with my car and just swap a Terminator X Max in there and play with a little bit. But, I got a lot of ideas and no time. So, but so basically Sniper, TBI, then Terminator X, and that can be either an LS type system, a standalone system. Terminator X and HP and Dominator use the same connectors and architecture for the wiring schematic, and so the literally, if you put a Terminator X in your car and then down the road want to, go, with a Dominator HP, you just change the O2 sensor jumper and the O2 and plug in your Dominator HP.
There you go. So ease of connection. I like that.
Yes.
All right. And the only one that have any experience with is the HP. That's the only one that I've worked with in that car I was recently driving. Mike Posey has a question here. Can Robin give an outlook on all the delays for the Holley dashes, especially the 6.86 inch delay?
Well, I don't know about the 686. I know the 12.3 were caught up, and the 12.3 they're on the shelf. 686s were we of course we're in the same boat as everybody else with chips and microprocessor shortages, supply chain, and so they've been knocking those out as quickly as possible. And I have not even looked at the 686s lately, but I know they were building them. I know the 12.3s are caught up. I know I had 4 or 5 different people that I was tracking some 686s, and they've all received theirs. So, if I was guessing, if the outlook on the 686, I would probably have to say that, based on what I've heard and seen, I would say that we should be caught up in a couple months on the 686s.
All right, and then
That's what I've got right now. So, yeah.
The Terminator X uses Bosch sensors, so it doesn't use the NTK sensors.
And I talked to you about the HEFI using the 4.2 Bosch and the NTK, and Doug is correct. The Terminator X only uses a Bosch 4.9. So even the Bosch that's used on the HP and Dominator cannot be used on the Terminator X, just the Bosch 4.9.
Okay. Well, Bosch, a little more cost effective, right? If you need to replace, you just might have to replace them, play it safe once a year. NTK, you might be able to get away with twice a year if you're gambling.
Yeah, and I've got guys that come to my dyno that have these LS turbo cars and making 700, 800 the wheels with Terminator X ECUs, and so it's it was a huge thing. Again, the Dominator's got a lot of features, 34 inputs, 34 outputs. It has drive-by-wire transmission, control. It's got 12 injector drivers instead of 8 like the HP. So it's, in a lot of cases, people don't need all those features. And when I was talking to some of the crate engine people, about HP, and they were, I guess, they were using a lot of fast products and some other less expensive ECUs. The HP was just priced out of the price range, comparatively so. So the Terminator X's were, I think, for a complete system at one point in time, they were like $1,100. So, harness, ECU, O2 sensor, injector harness, and which that's a hell of a value. I can see why it gained a lot of popularity. But for a race car, I think the HP and Dominator are the better way to go, personally.
All right. Well, and then what was the one that you said you were going to try and get approved for stock Eliminator?
Well, I hadn't gotten approved. It was the Terminator.
Okay. So,
and there's, so it's not in the approved ECU list is what my point is. So,
right.
And,
did any of these boxes have controls that we could look at as, they could be used in cheating in any way, as far as controlling, like, drive shaft counting? Like, do these boxes can do all this stuff, right?
Yeah.
Is there a way for tech officials to make sure that people are not doing that in our NHRA stock and super stock world?
and I like a good challenge. I really do. So I have people come to me, in ARCA series and say, "Oh, I got this wizard that'll do this, and he can do this and do this." And I hand them 2 old ECUs that are, burn up somehow or whatever. I hand them 2 ECUs. I said, "Well, if you can violate that box and then make it look like it's okay, you bring it back to me. Let me know." But there's as far as capabilities, there is a tremendous amount of ability to build your own strategies, in the Holley. Drive shaft sensor is, of course, a big no-no, but yes, I mean, we have the ARC module, which is available as an option, an upgrade for the Holley. So literally, you pay a fee, it unlocks that feature. Well, you're going to have some sort of input, to enable that feature, make that feature work. But I love reading the message boards, and I love reading these guys, just talking about how these guys at NHRA don't know what you're looking for. They wouldn't know if it said. I mean, it's unbelievable, because I sit in meetings with these guys and we go over, electronics and capability, whether it's for Pro Stock or Factory X or whatever. And they come from Delphi, and they've been working with Bosch ECUs in IndyCar. So I'm like, yeah. So and there we brainstorm a lot, and so we talk about what you could do or what you could try. And I've given Lonnie some bench harness and ECU, so he can play with it. He can look at it and try different things. But ultimately, it's got a lot of capability. So in the IO function, the input output function, you can build, somebody, if they spend a lot of time, could build a strategy, again, and we're talking about saving a run, not necessarily making a run. Traction control is basically power management. That's what it is. It's pulling the power back, or saving the power, or riding the dots, or following a certain sequence. But ultimately, a car is going to be faster if you don't do that. If somebody in sip and slip or whatever, but pulling the power out is never good. And unless you have 3,000 horsepower in your stocker, I don't really see the need to pull power out. And there are people with, A stock automatic cars that have to pull power out to get them out of the hole. I know that. But anyway, there's many ways to cheat. And yes, in any of the modern electronics, whether it's Holley or, some of my competitors, the possibilities are there. You have to have a tenacious, technical staff that will look at what it takes and what inputs are going into that ECU. So that's the biggest key. I saw people that were bagging on the grid because it records, and I just laugh, because the grid is not, if you have a toggle switch and you have a pre-programmed retard, you can flip the toggle switch, whatever gear you want, and enable that retard. But is there an ability to look at RPM and change that timing? No, like an input from a drive shaft sensor or something like that. So again, I think that you have to have a tenacious and knowledgeable tech staff, and they know what to look for. And what's going to get them is if the sanctioning bodies know the software, because once they pull your software, they can see what you have. It's one thing to accuse somebody and not know what he's doing, but I don't have the ability to look at my competitor's software or his program. They do. They can, if you read the rules, they can literally impound the car, So if they want to take your ECU out of the car, you've signed that release. By participating, in my opinion, you've allowed them to have access to all of that. And trust me, they have looked at programs. And they will look at programs. And some of those guys are, some of those younger guys there are very, very smart. So the older guys have experience with some of the other systems and higher level racing series. And then the young guys are very, very sharp. So,
all right. Well, good. I'm glad. I hope that they are taking that initiative. And Darren Poole Adams says that Lonnie looked at all his data logs at Indy last year. Probably due to my So I'm glad, Lonnie. I'm glad that you helped them out. And when you're done racing and done at Holley, maybe you can be the next tech ECU inspector, if you will, and you can make sure there's no funny business going on in our clean class racing world. So, Robin, I thank you for letting us eat up, a better part of your day here. You're probably on the clock, and maybe you're the boss. I guess you can't get yelled at, so that's good.
No, Darren will just buy another ECU. He'll take care of that. See. But, anybody have any other questions from the other than Darren? Anybody else? So.
Yeah, we didn't have too many questions. You know what? We'll have a ton of questions tonight. I think when the rest of the workers get off of work. Yeah. So they can just watch this video. We covered a lot in an hour and 20 minutes. We covered speed density, alpha N, fuel injector sizing, air fuel ratios, some timing, some individual cylinder corrections, the differences in the ECUs. So we did a lot today. You did a lot today, I should say, Robin.
Great.
Thanks a lot for coming out. We appreciate it. I just wanted to make an announcement there, everybody. I've said it a couple times, but Dutch Classic this weekend at Maple Grove, they even upped the ante for the Hemi shootout. So the weather is supposed to be killer. The cars are going to be fast. Maple Grove Raceway in the fall is a beautiful sight to see. So check it out. It's the biggest national open in the country. The Pennsylvania Dutch Classic has been going on for like 50 years or something like that. So it's definitely a great event. Hope to see you guys there. I will be there. So Robin, I thank you very much for taking some time with us. Thanks for educating us. People can get in touch with you, if they want to buy something.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on here. I do appreciate it, and Holley appreciates the business. If they want to get a hold of me, basically my email address is robinlawrence@holley.com.
All one word, robinlawrence@holley.com. All right, we'll flash that up there for you. Thank you very much. Robin Lawrence at Holley.com. All right, guys, tell them that you saw him on the driver interviews with Bobby Fazio show. Robin Lawrence, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Bobby.
And hope to see you guys all next week, Tuesday tell-all. I have another driver interview airing on Thursday. That is Stan Holt. So we did Sheila Holt. We're going to do Stan Holt tomorrow. We'll have Jared Grenier next week. I still have Brett Sarbaugh in the A-Stick Corvette. We've got Paul Wong in his truck. I'm a little behind on my driver interviews. So stay tuned, everybody, and thanks for joining us. Follow on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. All right, everybody, take care. Have a nice day. Thank you, Robin.
Thank you.